Hi guys, and welcome to Book and Loop, where happiness is handmade and the best boyfriends are always found in books. So September really felt like it flew by. I can't even tell you. I felt like I blinked and it was basically over. And September has always been one of my favorite months just because I just love the start of the change of the season. It's like a little bit before the weather gets super cold, but you still have that little bit of a chill in the air. I did get a ton of reading done in September. I maxed my August. I rated all goals, and I got done 6 books for September, which I was super happy with. And I, of course, did not reward myself while I was reading any of these books or finishing any of these books. So instead, I'm going to just kind of breeze through really quick on the 6 books that I read in September. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So the first book that I read in September was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. And I had read Clap When You Land by her first. I know that was one of her later books, but I wound up reading Clap When You Land first, and I talked about that one back in my August I Read It All wrap up. And so I started out September reading The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and The Poet X is about Xiomara, who is raised in a very religious family, and she's kind of dealing with her own maturity and her own desire to be her own individual, kind of like discovering her sexuality and like trying to negotiate like her role as being this like brought up in this very religious household with these older parents, and her beliefs that she's been taught since she was little, and the things that the emotions and feelings that she's starting to feel as an adolescent. um this book was kind of very like middle of the road for me. I think that part of it was definitely the prose aspect. I've talked about it a lot on this channel. First when I read Junk Boy back in May, and then also when I did my discussion of Clapping Your Land last month. I just talked about how prose kind of doesn't always work for me when I'm reading a book. I just felt like I was missing a lot of the important details, and I don't know if part of that was like I was kind of reading Poet X fast, and because of that, I didn't really catch everything that the author was trying to get across. I did think that the whole message of words being powerful, and I will say that I did cry during the scene where, spoiler alert, so I will put a little like spoil thing up, as I talk about this, that way you guys can mute, and then you can unmute when I take the spoiler thing away. So, spoilers. So when Xiomara's mom burns her notebook, and you have like that whole sense of self being destroyed, and this is supposed to be like your parents, and they're supposed to be the people that like want to love and support you, and for them to destroy something that is so entirely yours and so thoroughly a representation of who you are, it was really heartbreaking to watch and to read. And that probably was the most powerful moment of the book for me, and it was something that really like touched home a little bit as somebody that loves to write, and as somebody that uses writing as their outlet for all the things that go on in their life, you know. So it was kind of just like really nice to connect with the book in that way, even though I did feel like I still missed a couple of things within the story. Spoiler section is over, you can come back now. So The Poet X, I thought overall was a really great storyline where you have Xiomara, and you have Xiomara's brother who's dealing with his own challenges at the same time that she is, where he's dealing with his own issues of sexuality within the context of that like overprotective, super religious family that they are trying to navigate separately but at the same time together. And I just love their relationship. I thought it was really great that they were so supportive of each other. Even though there was like a lot of disconnect between the two characters, I felt like they really leaned on each other really well, and I thought that that was like such a powerful point. I love sibling stories. I think I've talked about this previously, but anything that has like a really good sibling kind of element to it, I always get super happy about. So like I'm super happy, which I have on my shelf, to eventually read Three Dark Crowns, which is going to be about 3 sisters, and I'm super excited to read that eventually. But unfortunately I have to wait until I get to the B's because I'm still on the A's, but I digress. So I read another of Elizabeth Acevedo's books during September, and that was With the Fire on High. And I always wanted to read With the Fire on High. I thought it had a very beautiful cover. It really just like, I love anything that has like that like super like cool realistic art style, and I just like loved the art on the like cover art for With the Fire on High. So it was always a book I kind of had my eye on in the background. And let me tell you, it did not disappoint. I wound up really liking it a lot. I was very surprised by this. So it's about Imani Santiago, and Imani, when she was a freshman in high school, she wound up getting pregnant and giving birth to a daughter. This now takes place a few years later in her senior year, and Imani and her grandmother are struggling to make ends meet and try to create a good future for both Imani so that she can pass that good future on to her daughter. And Imani has a real love and talent for cooking. I would almost categorize this book as being magical realism, just because of the fact that when people eat Imani's cooking, it's like magic. It like elicits such like a strong response in them, and they do kind of like compare her cooking to being magic so much in the book that I was like, yes, this book is like magical realism. So during Imani's senior year of high school, her school that she goes to winds up adding a cooking class to their course schedule. And since she's a senior, she has an extra class that she could fill, and so Imani decides like she's going to take this cooking class, which will teach them about Spanish cuisine and then eventually lead to going to Spain for a week during spring break for a like immersive cooking experience. I really wound up liking this book a lot. I thought it was really great to see that like a life so different from my own, and it really like puts everything into perspective for you when you think about it. Like the struggles that Imani faces are probably not far off from a lot of the struggles that a lot of teen moms face. And when you think about it, like this is like such a almost like I want to say like a taboo subject where like people like look so down on teen moms or teen parents for being a teen mom or a teen parent, and you don't realize like all of the hard work and the thought that has to go into it. So I feel like this book really like put that into context and made it more tangible for outsiders to understand that struggle and the love and the passion that these people have for not only their child but for themselves, and that there is still a chance for a future. Your life doesn't end just because you had a kid. And I think that it was just a really nice message, and I loved the like characters I thought were really great. Not only Imani but her grandmother and the baby as well. They call her baby girl in the book, and she's just so cute. But I really also loved Malachi. I thought that he was a really really great character, and I thought that he was so like loving and open and supportive of Imani and like her whole situation. And I don't know, just a king through and through. So I really thought that all the characters were great. They're really fun and lovable, and I loved the support system that Elizabeth Acevedo created around Imani and her daughter. And I just thought that it was a really like sweet, like heart-touching novel about motherhood and about the like struggle to better your life and to not kind of let what everybody else says about you get in the way of your dreams. It was a good book. I definitely recommend it. And this book was written in prose, which I liked as well. I think that that helped. I like getting that like extra context. So those are the two Elizabeth Acevedo books that I read during September. So that's The Poet X and With the Fire on High. So the next two books that I read were both by Fred Aceves, and these two books were both like at the heart of it. Like I don't know how to describe it other than like boy books almost, like, and it's hard to describe because obviously anybody can enjoy any kind of book. As a librarian, there's like a slight difference. Like you have those kids that come in and they're like, I don't want to read about anything that's girly, or I don't want to read a book that has girly themes. And like these two books are the books that I would probably like lean more towards for those kind of patrons. And like yeah, like I thoroughly believe anybody could enjoy any book. It doesn't really matter. But like there is kind of like that need as a librarian to sometimes fill those requests. And so these are like really like were both books that I would give to that type of patron that was looking for something that was like boyish, you know? So The Closest I've Come was about a boy named Marcos, and Marcos' main goal is that he wants to find love. And he feels that finding his perfect girl is going to make him feel complete, and it'll be okay for him to feel softer feelings and to kind of like just like make his life better overall. So he winds up meeting this girl in one of his classes, and he winds up kind of love at first sighting, falling in love with her. So he kind of spends the rest of the book trying to like get this girl to kind of like him back. So Marcos is kind of from a very like troubled home life. His mom is kind of never really around for him. I mean, she's there physically but not ever like emotionally or like socially there for him. And she kind of has like a lot of boyfriends, and her current boyfriend is super abusive, super nasty, and racist towards Marcos. And his friends are kind of, you know, his friends, they're his boys, you know, but they're never like able to be emotionally vulnerable with each other. And that's something that Marcos is craving, and he feels like he'll be able to get that from a girlfriend. So it winds up that Marcos is selected to be pulled into basically this like future success program at their school. And what it is they take these kids that should be performing really well in school, but because of all different types of reasons, whether that be a sick parent or sibling, troubled home life, poverty, anything like that, they are pulling these kids into this classroom where they will meet for an hour to 2 hours just to talk about studying tips, knowing kind of like how to best study for your learning type, and like all different stuff like that. And it's like meant to give these kids an opportunity to build themselves. And Marcos decides he's only going to join because this girl that he had his like love at first sight moment with is joining. And the story is kind of just about Marcos like dealing with everything going on in his life and trying to make the best of everything that he can, and like kind of just understanding like his needs and being able to communicate that with the people around him. So I thought that The Closest I've Come was kind of just like very like middle of the road book for me as well. I felt like this month had a lot of just like middle of the road books for me. There wasn't anything that I like super loved, and there wasn't anything that I really hated either. Um, which is fine. I mean, that's to be expected. I mean, middle of the road is like kind of what I expected most of the books in the collection to be, because obviously like I'm not going to be reading like my favorite genre all the time, and I'm going to be reading things that I'm not exactly happy with all the time. So, middle of the road, I'm okay with. The second Fred Aceves book that I read was the new David Espinoza, and that one I actually thought was a little bit better than The Closest I've Come, in that I thought that the content was a little better. The Closest I've Come kind of felt a little bit, the plot was like a little bit shaky for me. I wasn't entirely sure like what exactly, like there was no like super clear like beginning, middle, end. Whereas sorry, I mean like too many titles. Whereas the new David Espinoza had like that clear like plot structure to me. Like there was a clear ending, there was something that this character was working towards, whereas The Closest I've Come, it was a little more like iffy. So the new David Espinoza is about David Espinoza, and basically the last day of school during his junior year, David winds up getting sucker punched in the head by one of the school bullies, and being knocked out cold. All the people in the school kind of start making fun of him, and David is so sick of being kind of like never into the joke and being made fun of. He's this very like slim kid. He's got like a very slim figure. He's not very muscular. He's not very big. And he's very self-conscious about that and very insecure about this. And because of that, he kind of decides that over the summer he wants to become totally unknowable. He's sick of people seeing him on the side, driving down the side of the road and yelling out the window at him that he was the kid that got sucker punched. And so he decides he's going to make a change. So he winds up starting to go to the gym, and he has this whole plan that he's going to completely transform himself over the summer so that when he gets back to school the next year, no one will even think about messing with him, because to David, if you're bigger, no one messes with you. So what he winds up doing is going to this gym, and he meets the like head of the gym and some other guys, and these other guys are bodybuilders, and because they're bodybuilders and they're trying to get as big as possible to compete in the bodybuilding competitions, they are using steroids. And at first David knows that this is kind of like a big no-no and not really something that he should be getting into, but eventually David starts to feel like maybe he's not getting as big as he would like to get fast enough. And so David kind of gets pulled into that world of steroids. And this was like a really interesting book for me. It's not like anything that I've ever read before. It was a lot of like bodybuilding and like, okay, we're gonna do however many sets of Russian squats and like all like stuff like that. And I thought that it was really interesting because, like I said, it's not really something I would normally pick up, and not really something that I was like thought I was gonna really be into. But I just like joined a new gym when I started reading this, and that kind of like made me like think a little more into it. And I thought it was really good. You kind of see like this whole like dependence or this whole obsession with David with getting bigger, and how that kind of affects the relationships in his life. and how like his support systems kind of fall around him. And it shows how like that obsession with how you look can be a real problem. And because of that, David kind of develops body dysmorphia. Like you see like that whole world like kind of like come down around him because of his obsession with how he looks, and like that need and desire to be like this big muscly guy. And it is like so upsetting, and I thought that the story was really well thought out and really well planned, where David was like, no, like I don't have a problem, and like you don't think about like what goes into these people that are bodybuilders and like all these behind the scene things. And I just thought it was like really interesting. It was informative and it was interesting, and it was also like heartbreaking almost to think like, oh my god, like he like really like doesn't understand, and like he's like forcing himself into doing these things because he doesn't believe in himself and he doesn't see himself the way that he really is. I felt like was a good look into not only like body dysmorphia, but also like a little bit of like toxic masculinity as well. And I'm not gonna like dive too much into that because I definitely think it's like a book worth reading. So I'll try to just like leave it at that. But I did think it was really good. I was really impressed, and I did really like the new David Espinoza more than I did The Closest I've Come. So yeah. So that's The Closest I've Come and the new David Espinoza by Fred Aceves. The next book I read was a like make you cry sob book, and I usually, and I've talked about this, I don't like books that are like make me want to cry books. Like I like books that are like hype books almost. Like I don't know how else to describe it, but like I love stories where you have like, oh, we're going on an adventure and we're gonna overthrow the king, and like it's like all this stuff. And like I think like stories like that are like so much more up my alley that like crying, I don't like books that make me cry. I feel like that's like a totally normal and okay thing. But even so, the next book that I had to read for the I Read It All was Sign Language by Amy Ackley. And let me tell you, I sobbed while reading this book. So Sign Language by Amy Ackley is about 12-year-old Abby, and Abby's father comes home one day after going to the hospital and needing surgery, and Abby has no clue that her world is about to be completely turned on its head. It turns out that Abby's dad has kidney cancer. It's reached a stage where their doctors can't really do anything for him. The book kind of shows like Abby and her family's struggle with coming to terms with the fact that their father is dying and eventually healing after he is gone. And I will tell you, I probably cried like maybe 6 times when reading this. Which was not great because I did read it a little bit sitting at my desk at work, and all of a sudden I was like, I like paused for a second and I had like tears literally like streaming down my face, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so sad. And then I looked up and realized where I was, and I was like, oh yeah, like I'm like sitting in the middle of the library right now. So I had to kind of like step back from reading it at work, and then I kind of just started reading it at home from then on because I didn't want to keep crying all the time when I was at work. But it was just a really beautiful book, and I felt like it really portrayed that grieving process in a very like organic way, and I thought that it would be really helpful for any kid that was going through something like this to have that story to kind of tell them like, yeah, it's okay to feel what you're feeling, and look, there are others that kind of feel that same way, and like everybody grieves differently and everybody has a different process, and like it's okay to like admit that you need help, and that it's okay to admit that you're angry and you're sad and you want to cry, and like all these different things that Abby was kind of like repressing in the book, and like having that support system around you. Like it really just like was so like beautifully written, and I thought handled so gracefully, and I really like just really loved the book. Like I thought it was so good. So yeah, that is Sign Language by Amy Ackley, and I definitely think that's another one. This was probably my favorite book that I read during September. Which is like so funny because like literally like I hate books that make you cry, but like this was like easily like the best book that I read. I was really hesitant to read it at first because I knew that it was gonna be like a book that was gonna make me cry, so I was like so hesitant to like start reading it because I was like, I don't know, like I'm not really in the mood for a sad book right now. But then was so happy that I like pushed through, and like it wound up being like so good. So the last book that I read in September was Ruthless by Carolyn Lee Adams, and let me say I was pleasantly surprised by this one. So it's a thriller, and again, I don't really like thrillers. I have a long list of like things that I don't really love. Like I don't really love poetry, like verse books, and I don't really like sad books, and I don't really like thrillers or horrors. It was like a big whammy this September of like books that I didn't really like love, but wound up really liking. So I did wind up really liking Ruthless, which I was like super surprised about. So Ruthless is about 17-year-old Ruth who winds up getting kidnapped and taken to a second location where there's a cabin in the woods, and the man who has kidnapped her has kidnapped 6 other girls that kind of look a little bit like Ruth, has taken to this cabin and basically murdered them. And Ruth is determined not to be his 7th victim. I don't want to dive too much into the like nitty gritty details of this book because I felt like it was such like a great like wild ride, and that's why like I don't know, like it was like a little bit like survivalist story meets like thriller meet, like it was just like really good. Like it was like had all the makings of a good thriller, and like I really just like enjoyed it. Like I thought that it was like so good, and I was like really pleasantly surprised by it. I loved Ruth. I thought she was really strong and powerful, and I feel like the fact that she was so determined, and that because of her background, so she like competes in horse competitions because of her background as like this competitive sport person, like it made her drive and her like ability to do what it takes to win like so much more powerful. um but I don't want to like spoil too much, so I think I'm gonna leave it at that because Ruthless I thought was really good. It's definitely worth the read if you want like a quick thriller read. um it is like a little bit gory, but I feel like that's like the name of the game, you know, like that's just like how like books like this are. So I thought that it was like pretty good. I think it portrayed like the like madness and like that like almost like sick satisfaction of like playing a game. Like it's like hard to explain. It's like so hard to explain. You kind of just have to like read it and then you'll get it. And then like it was just good. I really liked it, and I was really like pleasantly surprised by that. So yeah, so those are the 6 I read it all books that I read during September. So that was The Poet X and With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, and then The Closest I've Come and the new David Espinoza by Fred Aceves, and then Sign Language by Amy Ackley, and then Ruthless by Carolyn Lee Adams. So those are the 6 books that I read. And I really enjoyed them. I thought that they were all really good. The next book that I am reading I started already. I'm super excited. It is Children of Blood and Bone. I'm like super into it. Like I'm really loving it. I'm not that far into it. But I really am loving it so far. It's my first fantasy for the I Read It All series, which is like so exciting. It's also my first series for I Read It All. And I kind of have like something in the works for what I want to do when I do come upon a series when I'm doing this challenge, and I think that it'll be good. So I wouldn't give too much away of what that's gonna be, but there might be a video a little sooner than the end of the month for these. I still haven't decided what I want to do once I get past a certain point. Like say like I get past Children of Blood and Bone and I'm like into the bees, and then the third Children of Blood and Bone comes out, like how I'm going to kind of like handle that. I don't know if I'll do, what I'm thinking is maybe like in December, I'll go back and read any of the new acquisitions that we bought. Does that sound like a good idea? I don't know. Let me know if you guys think that that sounds like a good idea. If like December should be like my books I missed series, like books I missed month, you know, like I'll go back and like read any new books we got or any books that were checked out when I like was going through the stacks. So yeah, that's gonna be all from me. I hope you guys enjoyed my semi-quick review of all the books that I read in September. I'm so looking forward to October. I do have a couple of books outside of I Read It All lined up for October, like The X Hex by Erin Sterling. Just kind of like trying to read everything all at once just because I'm crazy. So yeah, so that's gonna be all from me. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will talk to you soon. Happy reading!